Pollock and Thurston are live. Welcome, everybody, on this Wednesday, September the 20th edition of the show. I am John Pollock, joined from Wrestlenomics HQ himself, Brandon Thurston. Hello, Brandon.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing great. You sound crystal clear.
Do
Feels
I?
like you're right here next to me.
We have an improved, an upgraded headset today, so hopefully I sound a little bit better.
Well, I guess as you're going into this new TKO era, it's time to upgrade everything. Well, little did we know that we would have a big Vince McMahon, feature to talk about at the start today. The LA Times dropping quite a story on Vince McMahon that a lot of it is kind of biographical in nature, but some new reporting attached to it, including the man who I might be putting near the top of our to get list, Ignace Lahoud.
Yes.
A man that has always kind of fascinated us, has a very mysterious name attached to him. And I think after reading this article that if we see some new signee in WWE who becomes a villain named Ignace, I think we can know how deep Vince McMahon is into the weeds of creative. But Ignace Lahoud speaking on the record with the LA Times and sharing his reasoning for leaving the board of directors, which he resigned from at the beginning of this year, that coincided with Vince McMahon elbowing his way into power, back into power.
He wasn't on the board for very long. He was probably on the board for maybe a year, maybe could be less than a year. I'd have to look. But when Vince McMahon forced his way back in January, Ignace Lahoud and Manjit Singh both resigned promptly after that happened. But yeah, he says, I think I have the quote here. He said he's talking about his return, Vince's return. It wasn't aligned with my way of seeing what governance is. There was a misalignment with what my values are.
That's about as straightforward as you're going to get from people in these positions and willing to speak publicly and I think be pretty transparent in the fact that I did not agree with the way this was handled and this person's return to power, and it is not something I wanted to be attached with. And certainly I think you would you would have to speak to each board member of how they felt, but this was a board that we have the SEC communication between the board that unanimously voted for Vince McMahon to stay on his extended retirement, which did include Nick Khan, who months later would state, well, everyone knew this is just, like one of those retirements, whatever. But then Vince said that's wonderful that you all want to unanimously vote me off the island, but I run the island, so I'm back.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing that this brings forward is it's exploring the legal jeopardy that Vince is still in. We know from the last earnings report from WWE, they disclosed in one little sentence, one very short paragraph in their big, long 10Q report, they disclosed that there was a search executed on Vince McMahon on July 17th related to the inquiry that's ongoing. Apparently, reportedly, according to this, it is, as you would expect, it's with the SEC, it's with the Department of Justice, and that continues to happen. They did talk to Jacob Frankel, who is the chair of Dickinson Wright's Government Investigations and Securities Enforcement Practice Group, and a former senior counsel for the SEC's Division of Enforcement. So I guess it sounds like this is a guy who used to work for the SEC.
Whenever you need 3 lines to explain your position in this world, usually carries some weight with it.
Yeah, so he used to work for the SEC Division of Enforcement. So I guess he's a lawyer who worked with the SEC on enforcing the rules and maybe laws around the SEC. And he said that the inquiry could be much broader than the one the company and its majority shareholder. And where's the beginning of this quote here? Depending on the potential findings, McMahon could face criminal and or civil liabilities that could prevent him from serving as an officer or director of a public company, as well as clawback of any quote-unquote ill-gotten gains. So this is somebody who knows the law, who knows the rules that are being looked at here, and saying that it could end up as a result of this investigation, or as a result of maybe he gets indicted, that he wouldn't be able to serve as a director of a public company, which he does right now. He is the executive chairman. He's the chairman of the board of TKO Group Holdings.
Yeah, I think like we talked about this last week, the fact that this did not seem to be something that was focused upon too much in the completion of this merger. The fact that this is something that is still pending, and this would be a pretty widespread article in terms of just shining a light on what is still in the midst of going down. Like, this is not a past tense story. It is one that, from the search warrant and subpoena from July, like, this is something that is ongoing and could go very deep. It could go, from what I take this to mean, beyond simply Vince McMahon, and certainly in his capacity to operate as an officer within the company. Like, these are all pretty important factors to be keeping abreast of when it comes to the immediate future for Vince McMahon.
Yeah, and it's something we've mentioned in passing. As I've said, it's one of the most underreported stories. Is that I think, based on what we've seen disclosed in W's own filings, that it feels like Vince McMahon could be indicted any day now, and this is lending credence to that he really is in some legal trouble that is not yet resolved. It might end up being nothing, but most grand juries indict. So we'll see what happens if he is the subject of this investigation. I've been asked, is there a non-compete? Let's say Vince McMahon ends up getting separated from WWE in some form. Is he legally bound to any non-compete that would prevent him from, I don't know, starting another wrestling company? It doesn't look like it from his employment agreement. He has a new employment agreement as of his return to the company in April. That's when his employment agreement is dated. He returned in January, but he's bound to a non-compete while he's working for the company, of course. He's probably bound to some sort of non-compete as connected to him being a member of the board of directors. I can't imagine that he's not bound to some non-compete that would prevent him in the event that he is separated from WWE. I would think there would be a period of months, at least, where he would not be able to start another wrestling company if that's even a road that he would go down.
Well, he would have no shortage of options, because it's a blossoming field of competitors out there, because it was also noted in this article that new and reinvigorated wrestling rivals have entered the ring, including the National Wrestling Alliance.
Yes.
And All Elite Wrestling, founded by Tony Khan, son of billionaire Shahid Khan, owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars and Fulham FC in 2019. Pretty much your, 1B and 1C to WWE, or
right.
NWA and AEW. I mean,
sure.
neck and neck for that number 2 spot in the U.S. pro wrestling appetite.
Sure. Maybe the LA Times is watching Fox News and watching Gutfeld and seeing the most watched wrestler in all of U.S. professional wrestling, the former NWA champion.
Yeah, walking away from the industry as well. So, I mean, that's going to be a gut punch to the NWA as well. Anything else you took from this article? I mean, there was like a fair amount to it. A lot of it stuff that we have discussed, kind of going over the allegations, the payments that were made between both the ex-employees and the Donald J. Trump Foundation that ties this all together, what he has reimbursed, and somewhat painting a picture that I don't know if it's completely accurate of sort of all of these pillars falling down around Vince McMahon, between the antitrust suit from MLW, the ongoing investigations that he is the subject of, and then mentioning where their television audience is versus 2018. And I really don't look at that as some need for concern when it comes to their television situation.
Yeah, I think it was framed as ratings are in decline, which I would say that they are not. They did mention the Trump stuff, including the fact that there's $5 million in payments that were made to the Trump Foundation, apparently in exchange for his services at WrestleMania 23, and then his appearance a couple of years later on Raw. Attributed as first reported by the Wall Street Journal. I guess I didn't report it. I speculated that this makes a lot of sense of it.
You really did put all the breadcrumbs out there for everyone to put together.
Yes. They talked to Mario Mancini, who says that he spoke to Rita Chatterton the day after she alleges Vince McMahon raped her in a limo in 1986. So there's some quotes there. Again, nothing new really, but things that he's of the nature that he said in the past. The LA Times,
and Chatterton's side declined comment in the article, right. Although we do know there was the recent settlement, and right. Whether that
she's bound to an NDA now or something.
Very well could be the case.
Yeah. And the LA Times did today in 2023 reach out to TKO Group Holdings spokesperson and asked if they had any comment on the 1997 Montreal Screwjob, and they declined.
Listen, this is a very good feature, but sometimes when this is like pretty much in order, we're going from like the steroid trial to the ring boy scandal, the death of Owen Hart, the Montreal screw job. It's like one of these is not quite like the other. And yeah, I feel sorry for the poor TKO intern that is now being informed by his higher ups. Can you get us some information about the Montreal screw job? We need to be abreast of this situation that occurred some 26 years ago.
Yeah, and like we didn't mention that there is that on the record comment from Ignacio Laud, but there is on background comments
Yes.
from people familiar with the board's investigation. Take that to mean whatever you might think it means. Where someone close to the board is saying, he said, and referring to Vince, he said, "Okay, do whatever you guys need to do. This is about the investigation. I'm not going to stand in your way." Of course, when the board said, "Well, we think you need to step down," he wasn't happy about it, but he did it. And then there's this item about loyalty, right? And McMahon explained to the board that he entered into settlements because he was trying to protect the company against potential litigation. During one phone call with the board, McMahon said the committee told the committee that, quote, allegations of unwanted sexual advances were false and that all relationships are consensual. He said to another person close to the board, quote, he's the kind of person who expects loyalty, said someone close to the board of one of the ousted directors, adding that McMahon viewed its investigation as an act of disloyalty, even though the board was doing its job.
Sounds like a very familiar friend of Vince McMahon's as well. He demands loyalty.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does kind of like paint this picture. Like this was not Vince McMahon just stepping away for optics and for the good of the company. Like he was going against his will of what, and I think in a different setting, he would have just doubled down and fought this. And quite honestly, could he have withstood this last summer? He probably could have, just given the way he was able to return, and this largely went behind him. It's just there continues to be new things surfacing that don't allow Vince McMahon to put this in the rear view. If not for these latest set of investigations that they released and alerted everyone in August, I mean, this would be something that I don't think would be focused on even to this degree, that an LA Times would be taking a deep look unless it was ongoing.
Yeah. And I have to think that Ari Emanuel and the people, working for Endeavor are aware of these risks, right? They have to be aware. And it's a contrast to Ari Emanuel's comments that he insisted that Vince, this is according to him, but insisted that Vince stay with the company as part of this merger. But I have to think they understand that there's a risk that Vince could be barred from being a member of the board. And if that happens, I mean, they'll go forward and I suppose they'll be fine. But I have to think that's something that they're aware of.
Coming up, we are going to be joined by the Wizard of Oz of pro wrestling media, Bill from WrestleTix, the man behind WrestleTix. He will be joining us in about 20 minutes time. And we're going to save our discussion about Grand Slam with Bill, as we will be going through what's been quite the last couple of days for the push for tonight's third Grand Slam event at Arthur Ashe Stadium, as wrestling fans will enter the stadium, and we will see if this event clocks past the 12:40 a.m. mark that it went to last year.
Did it go that late? Wow.
12:40 a.m. One Davey Portman tapped out this year. He was not making a return to New York after what was
all the events he's gone to. He's not going to this one.
That was it. The man has his limits. So we will chat with Bill a little bit later on about that, but a few other topics to get to. Sort of just some of your thoughts, Brandon, about the merger fallout over the last week or so. And we had the firings that went down on Friday, reportedly over 100 members of the staff gone. And then this week, there was a all-employee meeting held on Tuesday where Vince McMahon did make an appearance at WWE headquarters. And we are moving on into the TKO phase, and several notable names that have come out. Maybe the biggest one from an executive level being Jamie Horowitz, who was a pretty polarizing figure throughout his tenure in WWE.
Right. He was with Fox Sports previously. He left, I believe it's Fox that he left, right? That he left under.
He was with ESPN originally, went to Fox Sports, and then had a brief tenure at DAZN before he was hired.
Right. And he left, I believe it's Fox, under allegations of sexual harassment. But he was the EVP of digital and development with WWE. He was there for a couple of years in the Nick Khan era. He's out as part of this. Catherine Newman, who is the EVP of marketing, is also out. So I think those are the two most senior people, most high-ranking people in WWE that are out, but over 100 employees, according to Sean Ross Sapp, have been laid off. Graphics, marketing, even I was told production had a few unexpected layoffs that were a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much a gutting. Like when you're talking about a company of this many 100 employees and you're axing 100 or so of them, like that's a really significant portion. I've not heard of anything on the UFC side. If the cuts made its way there, I think that probably we would have heard of by now if there was anything on the UFC side. And not to state either that I know that Nick Khan sent out his message that, we are done with the reductions, as they call them. Who is to say if there is ever sort of a ripple effect down the road that there are additional cuts.
Workforce reductions.
Workforce reduction. Yes. Synergies.
Yes.
They're all just, what a great accomplishment for us that we were able to create these synergies.
Right. So WWE has over 800 employees as of their annual report at the end of last year. I believe that would be as of December last year. So they cut at least 100. I've been seeing, as I said last week, I've been seeing a lot of employees on LinkedIn just mentioning that they've started a new job working some other places before any of this. So maybe there's some employees being proactive and looking for work elsewhere. So who knows what the head count is now? Something well under 800, I would think. But it wouldn't be surprising if TKO continues to evaluate how many employees they really need and maybe does another round of cuts months from now.
One thing I was thinking about, and I feel like they're too distant to maybe have this connection, but who knows in these kind of creative ways that they come up. But as you see, Dana White is continuing to make a big push. He wants to get more of these performance institutes up around the world. Could you see something where a performance center and a performance institute, that there is something of where we can put these under one roof? Or do you feel that would be something that would just be too difficult? Because this is those are significant undertakings of building up these gyms all around the world that, both companies in essence are attempting to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, they're, in terms of the brand crossover, like I've said, if I'm UFC, I want to be careful about how much I'm cross promoting WWE, at least in my content. But it certainly makes sense to share a facility, at least financially. That's more convincing, right? Because facilities are expensive and utilities are expensive. It might make sense, if they're just sharing the same real estate. Yeah,
it's probably one of many areas you can look at just in terms of what can we make for a more affordable amount, and that's certainly a costly one. Also costly for WWE are going to be this writer's strike, which has now resulted in ABC picking up 10 additional Monday night games throughout this season. And how are the Bills week 2?
The Bills won. The Bills defeated Nick Khan's Las Vegas Raiders pretty soundly, much better. This maybe is not WCW all over again.
But the Bills, obviously week 1, they were a draw on Monday night.
Huge draw.
Yeah, huge. Nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers. I think this is
well, he was out from the beginning of the game, so he never played again.
That's it. Only in that first quarter hour. Right. But yes, we are going to get this past Monday, we had 2 Monday night games airing on. We had the ESPN and ESPN2 broadcast, and then an ABC broadcast that was simulcast on ESPN Plus. And for the rest of the season, we're going to have the Monday night games airing on both ESPN and ABC. And the result 2 weeks in has been the 2 least watched episodes of Raw, save for a best of episode last December. This has not been great early news for this season, and maybe quite a difficult one for Raw all of a sudden that will be going up against network and cable NFL competition.
Right. On the surface, you wouldn't think, just putting another game, putting the game on an additional channel, even if it is broadcast, it is ABC, that would drive so much more viewership. But it does. It leads to at least a few million more people watching the game. This most recent week was different. This was 2 different games, one on ABC, one on ESPN.
Which they will have to deal with again next Monday as well. They're doing the 2-game format next week too.
Okay, are they? Yeah, but it's going to make things more difficult. I mean, if I can show it here, the decline in 18 to 49 if you want to spin it, was not as bad. It was about even, slightly down from the same period, the same episode last year in the same week. But you know, you can't deny it. It's the least watched Raw ever. That's not a best of episode. So it's going to be tough for Raw for the rest of the season, probably.
It was interesting to see. It was the younger audience was not down. This seemed to be a function of your 50 plus audience that was not watching Raw that led to the overall viewership decline, because 18 to 49, they were up over the Bills Jets game from the week prior. And I mean, outside of football, like this is a pretty terrible number by Raw standards, but still is beating everything but football on Monday nights.
Right, and then this is particular to Raw. Like we've seen, if you're watching in video, you can see where it's been positive comparisons for most of this year until sometime in the middle of August, where we started to see some negative comparisons year over year in the same week, and that's continuing as the football season has started, and you know, you're working from an even lower base level versus last year.
Yeah, and I mean, I was speaking about this with Way on Monday, the idea that how many other networks are going to just be in this copycat method of taking a cable property and simulcasting it. And a lot of people can fall into the trap of, well, if it works for the NFL, it's got to certainly work for us as well. And NBC is not going to have this option because they do have The Voice coming back next Monday, but just throwing out the option that could very well be seen in this next contract cycle is at least the experiment of a week where you put Raw, whether it's the full show, whether it's 2 hours on NBC. Like, do you see that drawing any kind of meaningful audience on NBC in addition to the USA Network audience? I think it's worth experimenting, but I wouldn't be too high on what that would attract on NBC.
You'd have to assume it's going to attract, if it's worth doing. You want it to do better than whatever you're programming there otherwise. I think we've talked about this in the past, and that The Voice is on NBC on Monday nights, and maybe that's starting back up soon. So
it's back next Monday.
It's probably not doing what The Voice does, so it's not kicking The Voice out of that spot. But Monday Night Football has not been the only live event that has been simulcast on multiple networks. We've seen that a lot. I think even with award shows, March Madness did that. The NBA All-Star Game did that. Even some airings of Yellowstone have been aired across all of the Paramount networks simultaneously, or a lot of them, I should say.
I did want to ask your thoughts on the collision numbers. This was from Saturday night, so this was again going against a slew of college football games, and at least in the key numbers here, it was almost the exact same as the week prior. They did 467,000 viewers, and again a 0.15 in the 18 to 49 audience. Now, if you look under the hood of some of these numbers, there was a disastrous 18 to 34 drop in specific with men, which fell like 72% from the week before. This was their lowest 18 to 34 number ever. And it was a massive decline that these numbers kind of camouflage, but there was a huge tune out of young males for Collision on Saturday night.
Yeah, so we're talking about how many viewers there? 35,000. When we get into the smaller demos, I'm kind of like, you know, there's when the measurement is so small, that measurement is based on a sample. So we're talking about a small sample to determine a small measurement that is extrapolated onto the population. So the point being, I wonder if there's just a lot of volatility that's natural to happen when you're dealing with such a small number of people to begin with. But it really highlights how much the WPLEs are affecting AEW Collision. When, you know, you look at Payback, and it did basically a Rampage number against Payback, and it was also outpaced by Rampage when it went against SummerSlam. But I think this gives you an idea of what it's going to do against college football for the rest of the year, I guess.
Yeah, and we theorized last week what a NXT event is going to do against Collision, which we'll see on September 30th. And they are stacking this show. They have now added Becky Lynch to the No Mercy show. You have got Carmelo Hayes in the main event with Ilya Dragunov. Dominic Mysterio's in a match. Baron Corbin's in a match. But Becky is the key person on this show as well. So that's going to be an interesting experiment to see if Collision holds up significantly better against NXT, or if it does take a chunk out of it, because then they have a regular WWE PLE the very next Saturday, which will be streaming on Peacock, as opposed to Max, which is going to be shortly introducing a brand new sports tier. And First of all, Brandon, will you be jumping on board and getting this sports tier?
I guess I don't need it because everything that they're showing is still going to be on TNT and TBS.
Yes, there's nothing exclusive on this sports tier, as they're going to attempt to, I guess, balance the cable distributors with their streaming plans and not piss off anybody. But this will not include any AEW content, at least from the beginning point. But this will feature like Major League Baseball playoffs, and then the free trial ends at the end of February, so that they can charge you $10 when March Madness begins.
And is that the price point? It's $10 additional on
$9.99. But you've got to be a max subscriber first just to get this sports tier, and then that would be an additional cost.
And if you're like, say you're a cable customer who is only particular, you're interested in that stuff, you're not interested in a lot else that's being offered by your cable system, that maybe just an extra $10 or whatever I guess it's like another $10 or something like that for Max, right? Maybe that's enough to tip you over to cut the cord. So if you're one of these cable carriers and you're spending, something like you're paying WBD, a few dollars per subscriber, which comes out to millions and millions of dollars for their cable networks, would you be happy that this is happening?
I feel these, we had the sort of the Disney charter dispute that I think is going to somewhat lead the way for a lot of this thinking moving forward, is that for these networks, it's trying to carve this path towards this streaming future that they see. And these cable distributors that are finally going to at least put their foot down as much as they can about, we are paying you for what, and you are now watering down what we are paying for and giving people a pathway out. Like, to your point, if you're someone that only is getting your TBS TNT because you're a sports fan, this is a more inexpensive way to, like, if that's something you're holding on to, it's a reason to circumvent cable.
And we've seen, so I'm looking at like what the price of, we've seen some regional sports networks like the Yes Network, which is the network that carries the Yankees games. They're offering, it's $25 per month if you want the streaming version of the Yes Network. That's a pretty high price point. And I think that's on purpose to say, look, we're not going to undercut the cable systems that carry this, which, I'm sure they're charging less than $25 a month for the Yes Network. But this is pretty manageable. This is a pretty low price point. I was going to tweet this, but I decided not to because I knew everyone would not interpret it. But like, well, maybe they're just, there's no AEW on this, Max. It's going to be called Bleacher Report, I understand too, by the way. Yes. But so maybe they're just relying on AEW to carry all the to justify all the carriage fees from now on.
The AEW networks, TNT and TBS, they'll go through a rebranding period.
Yes.
Well, and this does coincide with a report from Andrew Zarian, who believes that by next year that AEW will have a deal on Max and expects them to go to a monthly pay-per-view model, which, I mean, we're kind of seeing the soft launch of that as we speak. Like, this is pretty much a monthly pay-per-view model that AEW is introducing to us with the addition of WrestleDream, with the Ring of Honor pay-per-views. Like, we have had a pay-per-view every month since March.
Yeah.
Like, I think if you go through this year, I think we have pretty much, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2 months, I think we've had a pay-per-view every month.
There was one in July, right? There was a Ring of Honor pay-per-view.
There was a Ring of Honor pay-per-view in July.
Yeah, there are 2 in August.
2 in August, yeah. So
there will be no pay-per-view in September, right? But there's 2 in August. You could say it averages out to 1 a month. But yeah, I think that's part of a new TV deal, and maybe there's some reason why there's something contingent on the new TV deal that is holding up AEW from being on Max at this point. Maybe there's some complicated issue there, but I do expect that to be part of a new TV deal. The pay-per-views, next day rights for the weekly shows, which have no home currently, and the rest of the library, which basically has no home either.
Well, maybe a year from now, we will be talking about AEW's return to Arthur Ashe Stadium for the first pay-per-view edition of Grand Slam. And here to chat all things Grand Slam and ticket related, this is like the Wizard of Oz joining us now. He is Bill from WrestleTix, who is here with us and sporting a Buffalo-themed shirt here for loyalty to Brandon. Hello, Bill.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yes. It's great to prove to everyone now that we are not the same person.
Yes. There's strangely enough, some people out there who insist WrestleTix is run by Brandon Thurston. So,
wow. So WrestleTix is not a Brandon Thurston burner account after all these years. Well, first of all, we'll get into some of the current stuff, Bill, but just give us a little bit of your background and how you started WrestleTix going, because I think you got on most people's radar right towards the end of the pandemic, where there was a heightened interest in seeing what was the return to crowds going to be like, and having like reliable tracking systems that you have really made that your beat.
Yeah, so before the pandemic is when I really started tracking things, like kind of just as a hobby. And after the pandemic's when I tracked it full time. But yeah, so for a while, I had an account on Twitter that just tracked AEW shows because their maps were a little bit easier. They just had, at the time they were running maybe some smaller venues, and I didn't. So I was using different software, trying different things, and just took an interest to doing it. And then I figured out a better way to do it through Ticketmaster using JavaScript, a programming language, and then WWE shows were just as easy to track. So I started doing that, and I've been a wrestling fan my whole life, and been following the business for a long time. So just out of nowhere, I've always been fascinated with the business side of it. So once I figured out that I could get into these maps, and it took a long time to really learn about certain aspects of how they set up the arena and how they configure it for TV and for house shows and how it's different and stuff like that. But yeah, that's really the story. Is I started doing this before the pandemic for a while, and then I decided, all right, I'm going to start tracking this full time for both of the major promotions in North America. I still do the occasional New Japan show when they're over here, or if there's a big indie show. When GCW did the Hammerstein Ballroom, that was fun to follow that. So that's pretty much the backstory.
And for people who may not know, like you're using coding to do this. So I have to talk about coding for a second. And that, like, I remember, kind of thinking like, this is possible, like looking at Ticketmaster maps or whatever, and thinking, you could clearly, you can see what the dots are. You could do this. And I think, probably around the time you had started WrestleTix, or maybe a little bit before that, I was like, maybe this is something I was just learning how to code, and still am, but like thinking that this is something that could be done. And but thank God you've done it. It's way too much work for me to take on as well. So yes,
yeah, definitely a lot of work. But yeah, it was once I figured that out, it there's still a lot of manual work. I wish I could program all of it and automate it, but there's just so many different things that can happen during the course of the day that it'd be difficult to automate it all. So still a lot of manual work involved,
because you have to determine like what's actually being put on the market for sale and what is actually just being held back, and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just go off the entire map because a lot of maps will just give every section, even the ones that aren't open. So it's up to to you to figure out what's been open. And if you're following along from the pre-sales and stuff, it's that's something that's kind of easy to figure out. But as it goes along, of course, as demand increases for shows, they open up new sections, like in the upper deck and on the hard cam side. So, but yeah, that's usually how it goes.
Have you started to see any kind of large picture trends over these past 2 years, as we have seen the companies and kind of various strategies that you've just mentioned, and especially when it comes to sort of big stadium scale events, of what these companies are doing to kind of maximize interest? And like, this is as much like a marketing tool for them as it is a function of their business. It's like projecting all of these business success stories.
Yeah, so the trends have kind of flipped from when I started tracking full time. Like, for example, pre-sales, AEW did just, their biggest numbers were during the pre-sales, and WWE would typically do not like almost under 1,000 for a lot of shows for the pre-sales. And I would wonder, like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But then as time picked up, local advertising and stuff, you would see the distributed count go up as the show drew closer. But that's kind of flipped now. If you looked at some of the recent first counts for WWE shows, now they're doing considerably better on their pre-sales than they were before. And for AEW, some of the recent pre-sales haven't been as strong, not nearly as strong as the past. So, and then they're kind of pushing more tickets late now. So that trend's kind of flipped. For the bigger shows, WWE is definitely they've got a very interesting strategy now. You're not going to see first day sellouts for their stadium shows anymore because the way they're pricing the floor and the lower bowl. There's just they're so expensive, and that's why they're making these massive gates now. They're going to sell out all the upper decks, and they're going to let the brokers get those seats if they can, because they're the most affordable ones. Like even like Royal Rumble, looking back at January, I think for a lot of my updates, they had several thousand tickets left, but the reality is none of them were underneath like $200. So they price everything pretty high in those lower sections, and the strategy's working. So it's no longer brokers or scalpers making that money. They've smartened up. They're doing it. I mean, look at WrestleMania right now. They've sold whatever they put out for the most part, and the remaining tickets are really expensive. So I've got a lot of people asking, when are they going to release more? I believe they have a certain amount held back that they're slowly releasing. So this is an interesting strategy, because if you look at the map for Mania in Philadelphia at Lincoln Field, if you just look at it, it looks like it's sold out the way it's the tickets are sold and the resale tickets are on the map. But they're definitely holding some back and strategically releasing them, and they're not cheap. But it's a strategy that's working for them for the last few dome shows, the last few stadium shows. They're making a killing, and so again, you're not going to see like first day sellouts, and that's by design. So that's something that they've kind of done in the last few years. It wasn't like that when I first started tracking them. So other than that, yeah, I mean, other trends that I picked up on, I mean, house shows and everything for WWE has just been so incredibly strong. There's only been like a handful amount of shows where they haven't beat the last time here. That stat that I usually put on posts, where the last time at that building, I can only think of maybe 2 shows in this year where they haven't beat that number. So they've just been killing it. Some house shows, like they got a house show this weekend that's going to be 8,000. Really strong numbers. Last weekend they had one over 7,000. So there was a point where after the pandemic, they had there was a little down period for the house shows, and they actually canceled 5 house shows last year to show you how quickly things can turn around. And some of them were canceled because of slow starts, slow advances. And yeah, that's just completely turned around since the success of the Bloodline storyline and everything else, Cody coming over. So the house show business is booming for them.
Yeah, and just to the point you're making about ticket prices, and it's something that we discussed. Like, I think the way that we historically think about pro wrestling ticket sales doing really well is like it's an instant sellout, which All In 2018 is a good example of that, right? Where 10,000 tickets roughly sold out within a half an hour or whatever it was. But now they're, at the risk of just repeating what you said, they're because of secondary market sellers who are going to make the money if you don't. They're pricing it in such a way that we don't see these sort of complete sellouts like you might expect.
That's right. Yeah. I think there was like Dave Meltzer wrote about it once. There was a show in Orlando that AEW ran a pay-per-view, and he wrote a big story about how much money the scalpers supposedly made from that. It was 6 figures allegedly. And ever since that, it seems like the pricing model for AEW pay-per-views has gone up. But now I'm not gonna say that's the only reason, but I'll never forget that article because it was interesting. I mean, a lot of tickets were scooped up, and that was just an interesting show at the time. Anyways, they made some mistakes with pricing in some sections, but yeah, like pricing is important. And you think about tonight's show in Arthur Ashe Stadium. The first one, they announced attendance of 20,177. I had them a little over 19,000 for that show, and that was in 2021. And then last year's show did 13,321 tickets distributed. They didn't announce attendance, but it was the first $1 million TV gate for the company. So if you think about that, they made far more money than they did with less people than the first time there. Tonight's show, it'll be interesting if if a gate is mentioned at some point, because they did have extremely high ticket prices for the lower bowl and the floor, and some of those are still left, but they moved a lot of them today, but I'm just not sure if they moved them at that price. I fully expected those to come down a lot. There was floor seats for,
You remember the prices?
yeah, 597 for the floor
Wow.
seats, and I think it was 247 for the next level up. Not cheap for a TV show. I know that this card's kind of promoted as almost like a pay-per-view card. So, but still, like I think John, you said it at the beginning of the show or right before I came on, that it wouldn't surprise me at all if this becomes a pay-per-view next year. I always thought it should have been using this venue. I thought it should have been that way. But yeah, so going back to your point, Brandon, about ticket prices and all that, it's an interesting question. What would you prefer as far as, as a promoter? Would you rather have more people in the building, make it look full, 20,000 people, or the year after you do 13,000? Still looks good on TV, especially the way they shoot things nowadays, but you make a lot more money. Perception is important, I think, nowadays. So
I want to rent out the UFC Apex for Mark Zuckerberg and a few of his friends, and we can have 5 people on that television broadcast and just let them pay an ungodly amount. That would be it. Well, I mean, people are looking at this graph, and certainly like this year's, I mean, it's not going to reach last year's amount of tickets distributed. But if we were to look at that number a week ago, like they've had some sizable movement over these last 7 days. I'm just curious, Bill, what you would attribute some of that to, because I don't think it's one factor. But what have you observed in the last couple of days that have led to them kind of at the doorstep of 10,000 tickets?
So August 12th through September 5th or so. I keep track. I have a daily tracker for certain events, and I normally do this for the biggest pay-per-views. I did it for All In, and I've got one for WrestleMania and a few others, where I literally track the available count every single night to see what the movement's been like each day. And through that date range, there was such little movement at that time, like literally like 25 tickets or less per day. And then suddenly from that point, things kicked up once they started doing local advertising. And they started like building the card, making match announcements and stuff like that. And then obviously the biggest amount of movement was this week when they did all their media and even more local advertising, I assume. But so that really was the difference maker. And of course, I should mention there was a buy one, get one free offer. That's made a big difference for them. If you look at those sections on the map, they're about half gone or more, each one of them. So it worked. You need a code for it. So like those factors, I think it's important to maybe establish that local presence earlier. Maybe do that buy one, get one offer sooner. But I mean, it was a strong last minute push. Maybe waited a little bit too long, but I would say the biggest mistake from the beginning was just overpricing certain sections, in particular the floor and the lower bowl parts. Definitely were too high, because once they reduced the sections above not the floor, not the lowest section, but there's one other. They reduced those from like $150 to $30, and those literally went like the next 2 days. Those were all gone. So it was just about the price point, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it would seem like the card had interest, or does have interest, and yeah, it was just sticker shock from some people, which that's they were obviously aiming for a super high gate here, and I think it's at a time when it's just the company is colder than it was a year ago, and that goes beyond just tonight's show. But I mean, when we look at just the U.S. picture at the moment, like it does paint a picture of a company that has lost something with the audience, whether it's just characters not connecting in the same way, repeats in the market, like there is, and the fact that there is a greater demand for what is the industry leader in WWE in a lot of these markets too.
Well, one of the coolest things about what I do is I get to hear from the ticket buyers and right away, and not just in small sample sizes. So after this pre-sale for the show, I got an unusual amount of comments about people upset about the pricing. They wanted to sit in lower seats, but they weren't going to be paying multiple hundreds of dollars compared to the previous years. So I mean,
do you remember what the ticket prices were, say, for the first Grand Slam or even last year?
I mean, last year probably wasn't too far off, maybe just a little bit lower than this, but So I don't remember those off the top of my head. The first year was definitely, I mean, had to be considerably lower than the second year.
And that was the first $1 million gate, right?
Last year's show.
Last year's show was.
The
Okay.
first year
Yeah.
was just shy of $1 million. I think it was like 960. It was like really close.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, prices had to be much more reasonable for the first show for to have 6,000 less people or whatever and not hit $1 million.
I'd throw this out to both of you. I can start with Brandon. Like, do you feel that long term there's an impact to that fan that does go out the first week, buys, say, their $150 ticket, and then sees those prices reduced to 30? Or do you feel that's just the game and fans accept that? Do you think like there's a long-term impact on that for what you would think are some of your most loyal fans that are spending these high line prices and then seeing the company itself value them significantly less as we get closer?
Yeah, I mean, I would be mad if I paid a couple $100 for a ticket and then a couple months later it was available for like half that cost or something like that. That does seem like it's punishing your most hardcore fans for buying early. I don't know to what degree that's happening, and then Bill might know better. But it does seem like it's something that's, it's punishing rather than rewarding people for being early and paying a lot. But yeah, it's I don't know, yeah. So Bill, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I feel like, yesterday on Twitter, I made the mistake of saying they would lower those prices today on those floor seats. And maybe putting that out there publicly. I haven't seen it yet. And maybe they don't want to do that because that will upset people who purchase tickets at that price. I mean, enough people have. And to those that have bought those tickets at full price, at least they have reached out to me. They weren't as mad about it. They just said, I got the tickets. I'm excited for the show. But so long term, yeah, I think you got to be really careful with that. You got to definitely try to price that right next year. And because you can't just keep lowering the prices, then it teaches your ticket buying audience to wait till the end, and it's kind of risky to do that. I just feel like you got to price it right from the beginning if you can. And, they priced it to make another $1 million TV gate. And, I can't blame them. This is probably still a very significant revenue source for them until the next TV contract. So, but yeah, as far as, your ticket buyers in the area, you don't want to make that a habit.
And it makes sense just based on a supply and demand sense to price the tickets to what the secondary markets are going to get for it if you don't make it that price as face value. So I think some of the complaints about the ticket prices being too high are just what they are to begin with. I think that's a separate issue from talking about changing the prices as the event goes on and doesn't meet the demand that you expected it to meet. But I think, hopefully there are still tickets that are, on the map somewhere that are something that most people can afford. But a lot of this is just fighting against the secondary market sellers who are simply just, exploiting greater demand than might be expected.
So that's another thing about this show. What's interesting is there's more and more shows on Ticketmaster now that have the all-in pricing model where fees are basically baked in. So you're not getting a $20 ticket, but with $18 fees tacked on at the end. If it says $30 for the ticket, which they do have upper decks available, and those have actually been moving pretty well since 2 days ago. They're $30, I believe. So really, they're whatever, $10 plus fees, $20 plus fees, excuse me. And yeah, I think it's always important to have a low price point available for people. I've seen it with WWE over the years where they move a tremendous amount of $20 tickets late. And that was something I advocated for AEW to do in the past year or so. And ever since Collision, they have lowered that price point to $20 for a lot of the shows. As soon as right around that time, Collision started touring. Yeah, it was right around that time. Whereas when I saw the $20 tickets start coming in for a lot of their shows. Now they don't do it for every single arena. And I'm guessing, cost to rent and everything like that has something to do with it. So some arenas, they probably just can't do that or they can justify that. But I think it's important to have that low price point. I'm seeing it more. I've seen it throughout the years, even when WWE wasn't hot, they could still move a lot of those $20 tickets late.
With the addition of Collision, one of the big questions has been, will having Collision year round start to dilute the value of tickets for Dynamite? I'm looking at a chart that I've made out of your data, and Dynamite for the last several months is just sort of hovering around the 5,000 range, but there are advances looking forward, obviously, that I don't have as great of a handle on. But like, do you see in the advances anything that tells you having 2 weekly shows is going to start to diminish at least Dynamite?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look at the Montreal advances for the pre-sales that just happened last week. I believe it was 3,500 for Dynamite and just 1,900 for Collision. So you'd like to see for the first time in that market. I expect Montreal to do really well for AEW. You know, I'm surprised it's not doing better than that. But if you look at the map, there's there's one thing that really stands out for Dynamite is the cheapest sections all sold out. There's like 3 of them there, and there's no tickets left in them. But as far as other advances, yeah, there's definitely that was my concern with Collision, and especially if it doesn't. I'm just not sure if it's established enough with its own identity to do well on its own, and now forcing AEW to go into new markets and stuff like that with a show that isn't perceived as, I'm not sure what it's perceived at, but maybe it's not the A brand to some fans. So how is it going to do consistently? We'll see. We'll see as time goes on. But right now, some of the advances for Dynamite and Salt Lake City's kind of weak. It was like 1,600 last time I checked. Independence, Missouri, it's not going to be your strongest market anyways, but it's under 2,000. Toledo,
1,500 right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Toledo, I think was at like 1,700 or close to it. Philadelphia, you'd like to see Philly. That's you should see 5,000 for Philadelphia, and they're at 2,400 right now. Yeah. Yep. But some markets, like for Dynamite, I think a healthy number.
You just know these numbers in your head. You remember them?
Well, yeah. I mean, I look at these maps every day. So for my process, I have to track anywhere from 50 to 70 shows that are in the future. So every day I have to check on at least like 9 to 12 maps, and some of these numbers just stand out to me.
People expect me to be that way about ratings, but I'm not. But that's impressive.
But yeah, I mean, so some of the advances, yeah, like even some of the shows that just happened. I mean, Cincinnati was not a good number, It was, and it's a tough one to explain. Ticket prices weren't ridiculous for that one.
2,700.
Yeah, and they did great the first time in the market, or they did fine, I should say. I think if I recall, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8,000 or something like that, and that was at the college venue. So, yeah,
And these are fairly like big arenas they're running on top of it, like Cleveland. They were just at the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, like the Heritage Bank Arena in Cincinnati. Like these are like the A-list venues that they're running in these cities as well. So it's not just the number, but it's also the size of the venue that they're booking, which is sometimes tough to take that step back if you want to scale back and just worry about your perception of going to whatever the B building is in the city, for instance. It somewhat suggests to me that there is a growing number of fans that are discerning between what they see as important and wanting to go to the event that is going to have the level of an importance. They can put tickets on sale for a Forbidden Door, and immediately there's an audience for that, and we get an immediate sellout in Toronto. And I would think that with Montreal, like if it was a pay-per-view, I think you'd have a much bigger advance for that market. You would certainly look at Montreal as one of those last remaining cities for AEW to hit in North America that would have that kind of response. But, putting All In aside, like Forbidden Door might be their strongest brand. And what do you feel is sort of the strategy for next year, and where you go in a US market for something that you would aim at, your largest audience for what is your biggest like US based pay-per-view?
For United States, that's tough. Chicago. I think fans are tired of Chicago being featured so much for so many of the events, but I guess you have to reevaluate after this year to see what your strongest markets are. I'm happy they did Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle for Wrestle Dream, although it was an odd strategy to do Collision first and not do a combo package for both. And so I know some fans were like, "Oh wait, I didn't know we were getting a pay-per-view too." And and that right now looks like it could be one of the lower pay-per-views in the history of the company. It just passed 5,000. I expect it'll increase as we get there. Maybe they can do between 6,000 and 7,000. But yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, if you look at some of the advances as far as like, would I do a big stadium show next year in the United States? Probably not. I don't think now's the time to do that. I think doing all in London's is probably the best bet. And as far as
is Arthur Ashe Stadium a guarantee now? I know it's hard to look a year into the future, but if like we're seeing sort of a consistency here of what we're going through these months, like do you second guess like an Arthur Ashe Stadium if it's a similar level of interest level 9 months from now?
That's a great question. I would have to see it through as a pay-per-view, first of all, and then just adjusting the pricing model for the show next year. I think those are two things you could do that could help draw a big audience and do a healthy gate for them. But Texas, they do some numbers, decent numbers in Texas too. So finding maybe a venue that whether it's in Dallas, they've had some success there. So in Garland, so they could probably find trying to think of like AT&T in San Antonio maybe, but I'm not sure. What would be the best one. They got people there that'll be looking through, they have all this data and make pretty well-informed decisions on it. So it'll just, I can't give you a great answer as far as like what will be the best option for like the biggest show possible in the States. But I like the idea like of making Forbidden Door. Too bad they didn't save Montreal for that. I thought that that could have been a good idea, but they might just go back to Toronto and hope to sell it out again.
When we look at since the return to touring in summer 2021, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when they started, they were doing a lot of sort of mid-sized venues, maybe venues where a college basketball team plays or something like that. And now they've moved on to, I'm just looking at the list of some of the recent buildings they've run, including obviously United Center. Rupp Arena I think it's a college venue actually, but it's pretty big. I think they're running a lot of NBA and NHL arenas and now they're drawing something like 4,000, maybe as much as 5,000 or 3,000. And, that's not filling the venue completely. It's leaving a lot of empty seats, which probably diminishes the atmosphere and the appearance and adds to the expense. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it, to maybe look at smaller venues? And am I right about seeing a sort of a progression into larger venues over time?
Yeah, some of it's market dependent too. Like, I don't know if they can find a big venue in Independence, Missouri, or some of these other areas. They're going to be in Broomfield, Colorado, using that smaller venue one last time coming up, I believe, next week. But so there's a few other elements to this conversation. I feel like logistically there are some positives to AEW using these big arenas. Like even the one in Cincinnati, for example, a lot of these NBA and NHL sized arenas are more central to the city and easier to get to, and logistically easier to load into. I'm sure there's advantages from that standpoint too. So, they have the reasons for wanting to do it. Raphael mentioned on Talk is Jericho that Tony preferred using the bigger arenas. So, yeah, but I've just seen it where they are using more NBA sized arenas now. But I think it's really dependent on the market. So I don't know if they'll go back to using smaller arenas or if they would choose smaller ones just because of their stage is so big, like I said, I always wondered why they didn't go to certain venues that were smaller to mid-size. And from what I was told is because, maybe the lighting grid will work in that size venue, and maybe loading in is just too much of a challenge. So there's just different challenges that they face with the smaller venues they use, so that's as far as I know, as far as like, would they consider going back to smaller ones? It'll depend, I guess, on how the rest of the year goes and how, we'll see how it goes.
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to touch a bit upon like WWE, and it just seems week after week, especially these SmackDown numbers are through the roof. When did you first detect like this kind of momentum shift? Like when were the tickets like something that you were seeing like real movement that was showing that the television product was translating into people going out and buying tickets?
Yeah, they've been on fire. It actually really started even before the Vince allegations hit. So even before the Bloodline storyline heated up and everything like that, that's where people I think give the most credit to. But before then, you saw signs of pay-per-views and stuff like that starting to heat up. I believe it was in 2021 where they did the Royal Rumble at the Dome in St. Louis, and it wasn't like this huge number, but they took a chance at the time when business wasn't at its hottest, and they even used like half the venue, but and then you look at them a year later and they're they're filling up a similar size venue like that. But yeah, you could see it's not been overnight or anything like that. It was definitely just a slow build of momentum, and it's carried them to this point. And I'm real curious how long this will last. Right now, I don't see. Every now and then, you think you see an advance, and you're like, "Oh, is this a sign that it's starting to slow down?" But and then it'll just pick right back up. There's just a lot of good-looking shows in their future. But yeah, I mean, really throughout when Cody jumped, you could see things really start to pick up consistently, like nearly sold out shows, or where they were just starting to really beat the last time at the arena. Their last visit, I think that's the best comparison, is comparing to when they were last at the venue. Now they're consistently hitting these venues twice a year, if not more sometimes. And that's tough to do, is putting in a big number multiple times per year. So, but yeah, you could see the signs. It wasn't overnight for sure. It was just something that was slowly building for them. And right now, I just think you're not going to see. You're going to every WrestleMania, like for the next. I can imagine for the next 10 years, is because of reputation alone, is just going to do absolutely outstanding. There's not. They have nothing to worry about from that standpoint. With what they built there, it was just remarkable how well that did during the pre-sale and stuff. So I don't see that slowing up, and also similarly, the other big three or Royal Rumble at least and SummerSlam are on the same path where they're doing extremely well. So yeah, it was interesting ever since that Dome show and that Royal Rumble. Again, it didn't sell out or really come close to it, and they only used half of it. Half of it was curtained off, but they took a chance at the time where it was a little questionable to do it, and it still looked great on TV with how they shot it, and it just kept going from there. And I think that's the path really AEW is going to have to try at some point. Here, they're going to have to take a chance in a market they feel good about, and even if they're only using a certain portion of the stadium, they just got to try it and go from there. And they're going to have to establish that local presence as soon as possible, take over the city like WWE does for these events. It's difficult to do. I mean, it obviously will take a lot of money, and so there's a lot more involved than me telling them what to do. But
my last question is, have you ever come close to turning your comments off? And what is the discourse like for the person that is reporting on ticket figures for two very rational fan bases out there that love to just have, very level-headed discourse online?
Oh yeah, it's just awful. I at one point I turned the comments off for like a few tweets, and I felt like that was the wrong decision.
It encourages the quote tweets. It encourages people to say he doesn't want anybody to say anything.
Exactly. And so I've been accused of being, WWE apologist, AEW apologist, and
how much are they paying you?
Exactly. And now like the newest trends are fans listing capacities of the arena to show off how little of the arena AEW is using, for example, or if WWE doesn't sell out a show, then there's comments like not sold out. It's like
Brandon's just introduced drop counts to everyone's lexicon.
Yep, I saw
that's Brandon's fault.
saw a few of those. What's the drop count for Arthur Ashe? But yeah, so yeah, the discourse is usually pretty nasty, but you know, I'm really happy with how it is on, and cheap plug, but yeah, my Patreon, you know, the conversation there is much more civilized, and it's great to be able to have honest conversations about, you know, which shows are doing good and which aren't, and what are the potential reasons, and what could help and all that stuff. It's fun to discuss as a fan, and it doesn't always have to be so crazy toxic and all that stuff. But you know how that place is. I oftentimes, for a period of time, I just didn't look at the replies, but there really are some meaningful replies and some value you can get from them. And I get a lot of help from the people attending these shows. So I thank them, you know, as much as I can for sending me pictures. It's a big part of the process. Knowing, you know, if anything's changed from the sections that were open on the map and everything like that, it's great to have those final pictures, because you know, sometimes people get moved around. And I'll be curious to see how tonight looks with Arthur Ashe, and it's just yeah. So sometimes the comments, you know, a lot of them are silly nonsense, but yeah, I try to ignore the predictable ones at least.
Yeah, I guess we would be remiss if we didn't talk about All In. So the announced number, paid attendance, 81. I do have this memorized, 81,035. But then we learned from the Brent Civic Center, which is a local government, I think it's like a word for City Hall in the borough of Brent, 72,265. And if you just general thoughts on that, I guess, you know, we did some work together trying to determine exactly where the production kills were. And you got to 83,000. Is it 131 for the tickets distributed for All In, which fits, right? That fits. It should be higher than the number of tickets sold.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely have to reevaluate if that came in lower. Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. You know, you look at it, you explain the definition, and it, you know, to me, of course, it sounds, you have to like consider, like, did people buy tickets and then upgrade their tickets expecting to unload the other ones? Would that explain the gap? And
So it's just me that the secondary market, it's not as easy to offload tickets in the UK and
right,
the secondary market.
That's what I heard along the way as well. You could only list like so many on the UK Ticketmaster maps. I never saw it like cross over a certain amount of resale tickets. So,
and then point being, it's an 11% no-show rate. The difference between those two numbers, the 81,000 number and the 72,000 number, that means 81,000 tickets were bought, 72,265 tickets were actually redeemed.
So yeah, I mean, I don't have too much more to say about that. I covered that map so much, but I'm not looking forward to doing it next year. That was a tough one. But
how many people attended WrestleMania 3, Bill? That's the conversation starter at a party for everybody out there. The elusive attendance figure of 1987. Well, on that note, I definitely encourage people to go check out patreon.com/WrestleTix. You can also follow him and engage kindly on X if you so choose. But it's a great investment. $2 a month to get to be able to go to all your friends and be able to rattle off the capacity figures of all these different arenas. This is your key to such great insight that Bill provides, and context for a lot of these different shows and events and how things are moving. It's been very interesting to watch the movement this week for a Grand Slam as well. And we'll definitely have to have you back on sometime, Bill. And thank you so much. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is your debut interview wise, and the world getting to meet the man behind the great WrestleTix account.
This is, I promised Brandon he'd be the first I'd appear on, and I'm happy it's with you too, John. You're a total professional. Love your guys' show every week, and I'm happy to be on here. I'd be happy to do it again when my schedule allows in the future. That'd be great to pop on here, and I just can't thank everybody enough for their help, their support. These are just, at the end of the day, these are just my estimates. I love doing this. I think I've learned a lot.
And if I could say that this is the best quality data that I think we've ever had, as far as especially every show. We do have Polestar data, but that's not every show. That's like maybe a quarter of the shows. But this is for every individual show. And in the past, we've had, reports that are, in newsletters and stuff like that are, I think in a lot of cases, just eyeball, estimates from people who went to the show. And it appears to be, really well correlated to disclosures that WWE makes about their averages by the quarter. And I just don't think that we've ever been able to have insight like this on numbers related to live events that we can really have confidence in to this degree. So it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bill. We'll chat with you in the future. Thanks a lot.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. So there you go, everyone. He exists. From WrestleTix, who joined us. I got a good one last week. This person went to the effort of emailing me, so I do give them credit for this. His name on his email was Maeve Deltzer, and he commented that I missed the Canadian number for NXT last week because I'm clearly a shill that didn't want to reveal that NXT destroyed Dynamite last week, and I felt like replying. I didn't. I'm publicly replying that Dynamite was ahead of NXT last week.
If you're going to respond to trolls, always respond in a different medium than they initially engaged with you. And that is.
I give this person credit for like emailing me. It wasn't just a tweet. So it's like they went to the effort to email me. So you do get a public response. Maeve Deltzer out there. Legit was the name that came up on this. So nonetheless. Yes. All right. That was a great chat. So go check out twitter.com/WrestleTix. And Brandon, will you be watching Grand Slam tonight? And what do you feel like this Dynamite, for all the talk of like the tickets and such, like Dynamite numbers have been pretty much like they don't move up too much. They don't move down too much. Like there was the outlier of like Blood and Guts hitting, I think, a 0.34, but typically it's like a 0.29 to a 0.31 is most weeks. And like, do you see tonight's show? I mean, this is your best opportunity of getting a spike, but do you think we're sort of into that Impact Wrestling Spike TV range where it's like no matter what they threw against the wall, it was like you got your 1.0?
So Blood and Guts, which is July 19th, it did do a 0.34, right? I doubt it does that degree, right? I feel like the Blood and Guts build was greater than the build for this show or for any of the particular matches on this show. I usually am roped in for my significant other to watch Big Brother on CBS, which will probably be number 1 overall. But on a second screen on Sling, I will have Dynamite on for sure.
Are you two going to check out Love After Divorce on Netflix?
Absolutely not.
So that's a waiting favorite. My last thing, what do you think the demo number was for the first Grand Slam 2 years ago? That was Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson.
I've just said I don't remember numbers well. I've been thinking lately, like they were doing over a 0.40 for a while there, right? And so you want 2 years ago, 2021.
Yeah. So this is super hot. Come in. This is that big September month.
The hottest AEW's ever been is August and September 2021. 4.8.
Very close. Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Last year they did a 0.35. So it was down. Okay. I don't think they hit a 0.35 this year.
No, I would say, I mean, it's been doing a 3.0 to a 3.2 lately, right? I would say maybe high end, maybe 3.3 at most.
I don't see it going down. I just don't know if they have enough that's going to really juice up the number all that much. But we will see. It does look like a very good card on paper tonight. So Wayne and I will be chatting about that 10 Eastern tonight on the Post YouTube channel for Rewind to Dynamite. And then we have we actually have 4 straight shows coming at you this week on postwrestlingcafe.com, including our look back at The Last of McGuinness. Did you ever see this documentary on Nigel McGuinness?
No, you guys are talking about it though.
It's very good. It's a very sobering ending, but does have the happy ending that this guy ends up going to work for WWE and now working with AEW. But at this time, this DVD came out and it was a guy that was pretty brutally honest about his career and where he felt he was at that time in his life. So we will go back to that 2013 documentary. That's Thursday at postwrestlingcafe.com. And Brandon is back Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics, as they will be making sense of all of the world of professional wrestling and maybe more insight into Grand Slam and whether it was a double, triple, home run, or a Grand Slam for the company. I don't know if this is going to be a Grand Slam for the company.
Yes, we'll talk about whatever business comes out of Grand Slam, the ratings, the
Vince
attendance.
McMahon, you can always count on Vince McMahon and CM Punk to have some kind of news.
There's more Vince McMahon here. CM Punk, a much bigger media draw, wrestling media draw, I think, than Vince McMahon. That's been proven. But maybe some discussion about this ABC perhaps being sold away from Disney, and what does that mean for this notion that maybe Disney is interested in SmackDown rights? Questioning that. And according to Vince McMahon, WWE is plateaued. That's why this deal had to be done.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. As business has been through the roof over the last 18 months, as Bill can attest to. Vince McMahon thought it was plateauing. Time to get out. This wrestling thing, it's a fad.
Did as much as he could do.
Yeah. What does that tell you to your perspective? Well, not your perspective, your actual partners now at TKO. Like it's a very odd way to phrase the state of your company.
I mean, there's some ways I can twist it into making sense, but he's clearly not reading the press releases that WWE is continuing to send out after every PLE about how they broke the attendance record, the gate record, the merch record, and all that. So.
Okay. Well, Vince McMahon, if he wants to clarify, you can get in touch with Brandon at WrestleNomics.com, and we'll try and squeeze you in for a segment. But that's it for us. Thanks to everyone for tuning in live or downloading after the fact. We're here every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and NXT numbers are about to drop, so go follow at WrestleNomics.